What's going on, everyone? I'm just a typical, average American here today to react and learn about some of the most underrated things about living in Canada. So today, I want to take a look at this Reddit discussion where somebody asked, what's something underrated about living in Canada? So I thought it'd be very fun to take a look at some of these suggestions from Canadians about the most overlooked or underrated things in Canada that us Americans really never get to appreciate or experience. So let's take a look at starting with, for me, it's Casa Loma in Toronto. Even though it is talked about, well, it's not talked about in America, that's for sure. It's not talked about enough for how awesome it is. Casa Loma? Sounds like another language or something. Toronto. Oh, it's a castle. There's a castle in Toronto. Look at this thing. Is there a description? It is a Gothic revival castle style mansion in Midtown Toronto. It's now a historic house, museum, and landmark from 1911, over 100 years ago. That's awesome. Yeah, exactly. Cool little recommendations of stuff in Canada that's underappreciated, like the sheer amount of untouched nature. Canada alone has 62% of the world's freshwater lakes. Yeah, that's sometimes I forget how much water Canada has. I think I did a whole video about that once. How much water Canada has. Anyway, not to get lost down that rabbit hole, or sinkhole, or water hole for that matter. The amount of untouched nature, just the nature in Canada in general. I have seen quite a few videos on YouTube that go into detail about some of the amazing nature in Canada. Apparently, a lot of it is untouched, like literally no one has explored it. Yeah, that's pretty darn cool, and it's something that Americans, we really don't think about when we think of Canada. I think we're just stuck thinking about, oh, it's cold. There's nothing there. It's a frozen hellscape. Like I know that sounds kind of crazy, but I think the real honest truth is a lot of Americans don't know what to visualize when we think of Canada. And there is a lot of this beautiful nature. Absolutely, that's great. What are some more underrated things about living in Canada? The sheer amount of nature. A lot of people talking about the nature. When you drive 30 minutes out of the city, 5 hours from Toronto, you are effectively in a never ending, untamed wilderness. Interesting that people are really bringing up the untamed, untouched aspect here. Is that like you want to go on a hike there, or I'd almost be a little nervous going into part of nature, even if it is beautiful Canadian nature. If it's like uncharted, untouched, like how adventurous are you guys? Oh my gosh. I can walk 10 minutes from my house. You would have no idea I'm in the capital city of my province. Really, that just makes it sound like there's a lot of nature in Canada in general. In the United States, I mean, in a lot of parts of the United States, you are really around nothing in regards to nature. A lot of states can actually be quite flat and boring, I'm sad to say. So that's really cool. There are many things that I could mention. One I've not seen yet. In much of the world, seeing a truly dark sky is impossible. Even in southern Ontario, it's work to get somewhere that has dark skies. For a large percentage of Canadians, it is possible, within a few hours of driving, to go somewhere that is dark enough that it has, under clear sky conditions, you can see the Milky Way from horizon to horizon. Is this true? You can see like the galaxy from Canada? I laugh, but that's awesome. Yeah, I don't think I've ever been far enough away from some form of human created light to ever like look up at the sky and see what you see on the background of a computer at the store, like the galaxy. To me, that's just a fantasy. But Canada is really cool in this sense that, especially if you travel north, I think you really start getting to really, really, really unpopulated areas. I think, gosh, could is it true? I think 90% of Canadians live within like an hour of the Canada US border. Um, so 10% of Canadians are spread out north of that. So yeah, this makes sense to me. In America, we're spread out a lot more, I think, throughout the United States, where there's always someone or something that's been built or explored. But this aspect of Canada being like just full of untouched nature, you can drive out a few hours and experience total darkness. That sounds pretty darn awesome. Every year in Alberta, we get a deep freeze. Everything creepy and crawly dies. This is a good way of viewing what I think of as a horrible situation, being in the Albertan deep freeze of winter. Yeah, everything dies, including me, if I'm in that situation. But the idea that all the bugs die, that sounds awesome. That is that is definitely underrated part of Canadian winter. I like that. As a woman, I feel safe walking around by myself in most neighborhoods. You can't put a price on that. I think in America, this just depends on where you live. Some of our biggest cities have issues with crime and safety. A lot of our smaller towns and cities are really lovely places to live where I think anyone would feel safe. I don't know. Yeah, on the other hand, no matter where you are, I think there's always some parts of town or whatever where no one would feel 1,000% safe walking around at night in pitch black. Um, but the idea that maybe you feel safer, especially as a woman, in a lot of parts of Canada, I'd be willing to believe that. That you can't put a price on that. That's true. This should be the most upvoted comment. I've lived in third world countries for years. I can vouch for this. Well, if we're comparing third world countries, that's a whole other thing where it's like if you go from a third world country to Canada or the United States, you probably feel pretty great in terms of safety. But in terms of safety, Canada versus US, I think Canada is definitely winning statistically with crime. So, yeah, I mean, that is one of the most important things, truly. Clean air and clean drinking water. I'd say this is mostly true in America as well. My mom lives here. Most underrated things about Canada. My mom lives here. She's the best. Okay. Department ready 1041. Their mom is in Canada. That's very underrated. I also choose this guy's mom. Oh, God. Okay. Rule of law and a functioning economy. People can poop on Canada all they want, but the quality of life here is light years ahead of the majority of the world. That's a good thing to always sit back and kind of appreciate, isn't it? No matter how much people will complain about their government or their circumstances or whatever, and maybe there are things to complain about. At the end of the day, if you're Canadian, you're living in Canada, which is pretty darn amazing. Good luck. If you're American and you're living in America, that's pretty darn amazing. Like, not to talk badly about other countries around the world, but there's a lot of circumstances around the world that, man, people in other countries are working their entire lives trying to get to Canada or the United States. So I totally agree with this. I go back to my parents' home country every year, which is technically a first world, and the place is an absolute dump compared to Canada. Little Freudian slip there. The place is an absolute dump compared to Canada, night and day. Wow. Wow, wow, wow. Yeah, I like to think that America also fits this criteria, but this isn't about America. This is about underrated things about Canada. And the people here are saying, compared to where they come from, there's nowhere they'd rather be than Canada, which says a lot. Doesn't apply to just Canada, but healthcare. Oh, geez. Maybe this does apply to just Canada because our healthcare systems are very different between Canada and here in America. As an American living here, oh, okay. Well, American perspective. This is the thing I am most appreciative of. Even though I currently have not needed the Canadian system outside of having children, oh, that'd be interesting. It costs a lot of money to birth children in America. It costs thousands of dollars, so that's already you're saving money in Canada, huh? My coworker volunteers in Minnesota every year at a summer camp with kids with heart disease. He's had 3 heart surgeries himself and said that kids down there are only teenagers, yet they have $800,000 in medical debt. This is a severely underrated thing about Canada. Is it though? Maybe for Canadians, maybe because you're used to it, maybe you underrate it, or maybe you appreciate it. But in America, oftentimes Americans will bring up criticisms of our healthcare system and will say, hey, look at how Canada does it. So I think it's not that underrated in America. It's rated. It's rated. Um, Casa Loma, that's a really local thing in a country the size of Canada. I wasn't gonna say that, but hey, in this discussion, it's a safe space. Say whatever you want, what you like about Canada. Casa Loma, random castle in Toronto. Why not? Our healthcare. We owe the people who work in healthcare our support. Yes, Canadian healthcare. Perhaps underrated by the Canadian people? I don't know. I know Canadians have criticisms of your system. You also praise your system. Is it underrated? I don't know. Access to good education. That's again kind of like safety. One of the most important things about where you live. Access to good education. Canada in particular is killing it in education. I think some of the data I've seen, like so much of the Canadian population is highly educated, and you have some of the best educational institutions. And we have a working culture that doesn't put a handful of schools on a pedestal and crap on the rest. No one in Canada really cares where you went to school. This comment is kind of buried deep down in this discussion, but I really like this. This hits close to home. In America, there's all this hubba bubba and fuss about where you go to college, and I always think like, as long as you're getting a quality education and you're gaining skills and a degree, does it really matter where you go all that much? In America, yes, yes. Your access to certain jobs or opportunities is directly related to the university you go to. Absolutely. Your connections. If in Canada it's a little more equal, a little less bias, that's fantastic. That is underrated. I haven't really heard about that before. Holy heck. Thank goodness for this. All of our educational institutions are accredited. It makes no difference. Yeah, that's fantastic. Yes, and I think I saw a comment about how it's not as expensive. Education, underrated in Canada for numerous reasons. Yes, especially from my American point of view, that most Canadians are kind, caring people. Absolutely, absolutely. Especially if you're on the internet too much, you can start thinking that people aren't that kind if you see internet trolls and stuff like that. But people in real life especially in America and small towns and cities, are kind, caring people. And I think that's a characteristic that most people attribute to Canada, for more so than any other country, that Canadians are kind, caring people. That hard to put a price on living in a country filled with kind, caring people. That's pretty darn good. Freedom. People take that for granted. Sure. Civility. The fact that we treat one another with basic kindness. Hold the door for the person behind you. Don't cut in line. Yeah, yeah. True. I like that we're jumping all over the place. We're kind of getting really specific at times with Casa Loma and really kind of basic and fundamental here with like what's underrated about Canada as a country, what's underrated or something that you take for granted is that it's filled with nice people, that there's great education, that it's safe. Someone earlier said that there's good drinking water. Sure, yeah, I'll take that. Absolutely. Anything else here? This is gonna sound weird, but Canada doesn't succumb to massive earthquakes, hurricanes, volcanoes, and heat. Yeah, America has had lots of problems with hurricanes, earthquakes to some extent. I never really hear about that in Canada. You do have quite a lot of wildfires in Canada. That's the only thing in regards to natural disasters. Like Canada has a lot of wildfires, but I don't really hear about earthquakes, hurricanes, volcanoes, or heat. Maybe you'd like a bit of heat. um, hurricanes affect us in Atlantic Canada. Is that true? On the East Coast? Um, walk a few hundred feet. Bears. What? This is supposed to be underrated things. This is supposed to be good things. Freedom. Um, I can go hiking and not worry that every Joe Schmo is going to be packing a handgun. Oh, jeez. After reading some comments on the US hiking forums, I don't think I'd ever hike in the United States. So, this fear of people carrying guns in America. Maybe that is underrated, that in Canada, people don't really have guns. I don't know. I'm American. I'm used to accepting a environment where I know people have guns at home. Maybe people are carrying guns around, maybe in their cars, maybe on hikes. You just stop thinking about it when you're American. Because to be honest, you don't really, for most people, goodness willing, you don't encounter guns on a day to day basis. Sure, they exist here. A lot of people have them, but you don't see them. You don't really talk about them. You don't really encounter them much in America, except in these extreme situations where the unthinkable happens, the polar extreme happens, and there's like a shooting at a school or on a hike or whatever. Then it's a huge deal. But 99% of the time, I don't think about it, which is maybe a privilege I've had in my American experience. Overall, safe quality of life, affordability of things. Really, are things affordable in Canada? I've heard that the groceries can get out of control, the housing prices, and the grocery store prices. So I don't know. This might be the one Canadian who's cool with all that. The metric system. Now this is just feeling like a personal attack. Okay, with that, that's that. I agree. The metric system is awesome. All right, fine, you got me. With that, I think that's pretty good. Yeah, this was kind of like a Canadian Appreciation Day. Some underrated stuff about living in Canada. I think this is all great points. Great points. And quite a few points I've never even heard of as an American about things that you really appreciate about living in Canada. So that was real fun for me, actually. I quite enjoyed this. Anyway, if you enjoyed this as well, feel free to give this video a like or leave a comment with your thoughts on what are underrated things about living in Canada. That'd be awesome to hear about from Canadians out there. And if you're interested in more videos like this, me reacting to Canada and learning about Canadian culture, feel free to subscribe for more. And until then, thanks for watching, and see you next time.